The galaxy was breaking apart one planet at a time. Across Sector 9, star systems were burning. Fleets clashed every hour. Once glorious cities now floated in silence, empty and cold. The Elendari Empire, proud and ancient, was falling faster than anyone had believed possible. Its enemies had grown bold. The royal bloodline had been hunted ship by ship until only whispers of survival remained. In the midst of this chaos, a sleek royal vessel, scarred, smoking, and nearly torn in two, cut across the stars. Its pilot was quiet, steady, and dressed in cracked silver armor. Her name was Sirexa Vel Atrin, Queen of the Elendari, though none would have recognized her now. Her crown was gone. Her face was smeared with soot and blood. Her royal sigil had been scratched off her chest plate. That wasn't by accident. She had done it herself. If the Gravic Horde saw that crest, she would be dead within minutes. The ship groaned beneath her. Sparks danced across the dashboard. Warning lights blinked red and angry. Hull breach, oxygen low, power failing. One engine coughed out and died, dragging the vessel off course. She gritted her teeth and pulled hard to steer toward the only safe zone nearby, a tiny rocky moon named Riven's Rock. It was a forgotten place. No cities, no fleets, just a gravity well, a junkyard, and a small human outpost buried in metal and dust. That would have to do. If she could land safely, she could hide, repair, regroup, live another day. She slammed the controls down. The ship dropped into the moon's atmosphere like a dying bird. The heat from re-entry licked across the hull. Parts broke off. The rear stabilizer exploded. The moon's jagged surface rushed up toward her. She aimed for the flattest space she could. See, the ship skidded into a canyon of rusted scrap. Broken engines, old steel, and the wrecks of forgotten wars. She blacked out when the vessel hit. When Sirexa woke, smoke filled the cockpit. Alarms screamed around her. Her fingers trembled as she unlatched the cockpit. With a groan, the glass hissed open. The cold air of Riven's Rock bit her skin. She climbed out and stumbled, landing hard on her knees. Her armor was cracked in 3 places. Her left boot was half melted. Her shoulder bled freely. She didn't care. She was alive. That was more than most of her people could say. She turned, her head as footsteps crunched on gravel. A figure walked toward her. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty gray clothes with a welding mask raised halfway up. A human. He stopped a few feet away and looked her over with calm, curious eyes. "Rough landing," he said, rubbing his chin. "I'd give it a 7 out of 10. You almost landed on my fuel tank." She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she trusted her voice yet. He tilted his head. "You hurt?" She nodded once. He stepped closer, crouching. "Armor's Elendari. That's rare out here. But don't worry. I don't sell scrap unless someone asks." He offered her a hand. "Name's Jace. I fix things." She hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. He helped her stand. "Come on, let's get you inside before that hull leak poisons what's left of your ship." She said nothing as he led her toward a small shack built into the side of a broken cargo hauler. Tools hung from the walls. Droids buzzed lazily near the ceiling. It smelled of oil, heat, and clean metal. "Safe." He motioned toward a bench. "Sit. I'll look at that armor. Might take a while, though. You want tea or something?" Sirexa blinked at him. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't kneel. Didn't even seem to care that she had just dropped out of the sky in a warship with royal-grade plating. To him, she was just another visitor, a customer, someone in need of repairs. She gave the smallest of nods. Jace walked off, muttering to himself about coolant leaks and missing screws. The Queen sat still, quiet and tense, her hands clenched. She had fled a dying empire, escaped fire and betrayal, but in a dusty workshop on a lonely moon, a human with grease on his sleeves had treated her like she was just anyone. And somehow, that unsettled her more than anything else. Jace worked like someone who had done this 1,000 times. His hands moved quickly, gently unlocking the armor's damaged segments without asking questions. Sparks flickered as he unscrewed a scorched panel from Sirex's chest plate. The Queen watched him silently, unsure how to react. She was used to guards bowing, engineers stammering, or ministers fussing about protocol. But this man didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't treat her like anything special. He handed her a clean cloth and pointed to a water canister. "You're bleeding. Might want to patch that while I work." His voice was kind but firm, like he talked to broken starships the same way he talked to people. Sirexa dabbed the wound on her shoulder and watched him return to the table, where pieces of her armor lay scattered like puzzle parts. Jace muttered things to himself, inspecting scorched circuits and snapped filaments. "Royal-grade circuitry, but you're missing a compression core. Stabilizers fried too." He didn't look up. "Your ship's gonna need more than duct tape, by the way. Right thrusters completely shot." Sirexa stayed quiet. She didn't know if she should lie about who she was or just stay silent and let him assume what he wanted. If he knew the truth, that she was the last living Elendari queen, that the Gravik horde would kill anyone who helped her, he might throw her out on the spot. But Jace didn't press. He just kept working. After a few hours, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Armor's patched enough to take a few hits. I replaced the cracked plate with a hull shard from an old Krell ship. Not pretty, but tough. Won't short out the next time someone shoots at you." Sirexa looked at him, then at the armor, and gave a small nod of thanks. He shrugged like it was nothing. Outside, the sky over Riven's Rock had turned dark orange, filled with dusty clouds and flickers of lightning. The moon was always stormy, bad for comms, good for hiding. Jace sat across from her and poured tea into a small metal cup. "So," he said casually, "who's trying to kill you?" Her eyes met his, sharp and cautious. "What makes you think someone is?" He smiled. "The armor, the burns, the half-melted ship, the silence. You didn't land here for sightseeing." She considered his words, then finally answered, "The Gravik horde." His expression darkened. "Ah, nasty bastards. Saw what they did to the orbital stations around Theta Prime. Blew up evac shuttles, just to send a message." He sipped his tea and looked at her again. "You're Elendari, that's obvious. But you're more than a soldier." Sirexa said nothing. He didn't press further. Instead, he stood and stretched. "Well, royalty or not, you're safe here. I don't talk to the Horde, and they don't care about backwater engineers." His words made something heavy shift in her chest. She had expected fear, or awe, or at least curiosity, but all she got was quiet trust. It felt strange. A loud ping interrupted their thoughts. Jace's warning system flashed red. He hurried over, tapping the screen. Ships, 3 of them, coming in fast. Sirexa stood at once. Her hand moved to the sidearm at her hip. "Gravik?" Jace nodded grimly. "Could be. They're not broadcasting IDs, and they're not slowing down." He turned to her. "If they're tracking you, they'll burn this place to the ground." Sirexa's jaw tightened. She looked at him. "You should run. Leave me here." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I built this place. I don't run from raiders." He pulled a long rifle from a wall locker and tossed a plasma battery into it. "If they want to fight, we'll give them one." For a moment, Sirexa saw something strange in him. Not just a mechanic, but a fighter. A survivor. And someone who, for reasons she didn't yet understand, had just chosen to stand beside her in a war that wasn't his. The storm outside rumbled louder. The Gravik ships dropped through the clouds, weapons charged. Inside the dusty little outpost, a queen in hiding and a human engineer stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face death together. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was enough. The first missile hit just outside the outpost, shaking the ground like thunder. Dust fell from the ceiling and the lights flickered. Jace moved fast, diving behind his workbench and grabbing another power cell for his rifle. Sirexa followed, without hesitation. Crouching beside him, her now patched armor humming faintly with renewed power. Outside, the Gravik landing craft lowered through the red clouds, their hulls black and sharp like armored insects. The ships hissed as they touched down, and armored figures poured out. Gravik warriors, 7 feet tall, thick-skinned, and heavily armed. Their eyes glowed with hunger for blood. Jace muttered under his breath. Figures, they always bring too many. Sorexa tightened her grip on her sidearm. They'll try to take me alive. They'll burn without a second thought. Jace glanced at her and gave a dry grin. Good. That means they won't expect me to shoot first. He popped the hatch at the top of the outpost and climbed up to the roof. Sorexa followed, her movements slower but steady. The storm winds whipped around them, carrying the scent of scorched metal and fire. The Gravik squad advanced quickly, spreading out with military precision. They didn't see the human engineer crouched behind a melted solar panel until it was too late. Jace fired once. His plasma round tore through the first warrior's helmet. The Gravik fell without a sound. The rest roared and returned fire, but Jace had already ducked behind cover. Sorexa leapt forward, activating her wrist shield, just as a bolt struck her shoulder. The impact stung but didn't break through. She rolled behind a broken engine husk and fired 2 clean shots, hitting another Gravik in the knee. It dropped with a scream. The battle raged across the scrap canyon. Jace knew every inch of this terrain. He used the piles of junk like a maze, flanking the enemy again and again. Sorexa moved with trained grace, a royal warrior in exile but not outmatched. Together they were faster, smarter, and more stubborn than the Gravik expected. Jace set a trip mine behind a metal drum, then whistled. One of the warriors turned just in time to step on it. The explosion lit the canyon orange, sending the Gravik flying. Sorexa, covered in ash and blood, charged through the smoke, kicking, a rifle from an enemy's grip and driving her elbow into its throat. The creature dropped with a choking wheeze. More were coming, but the pair didn't slow. For every Gravik warrior they dropped, 2 more surged forward. Sorexa's breathing grew ragged. A cut opened over her eyebrow, blood trailing into her eye. Jace's shoulder smoked where a blast had grazed him, but he kept fighting, teeth clenched. They fell back toward the entrance of the outpost. There's too many, he shouted. We need to fall back and blow the tunnel. Sorexa hesitated. That tunnel leads to your main reactor. Jace didn't blink. Exactly. If they go in, they'll level the whole moon. We end this now. She looked at him with new eyes, not as a mechanic, not as a human, but as someone who had already chosen his side, long before she had asked. She gave a nod. Inside, they rigged the main tunnel with 3 charges, linked to Jace's old detonation, remote. Outside, Gravik footsteps thundered closer. Jace tossed the remote to Sorexa. Go out the back tunnel. There's a shuttle I've been fixing. It can fly, just barely. Sorexa caught the remote and stared at him. You're not coming? Jace smirked. I'll hold them off. Someone needs to make sure they get close before we pop the fireworks. Her throat tightened. She had seen generals fall, friends die. But this human, this stranger, was about to burn for a war he didn't ask for. You'll die, she whispered. He smiled again, tired but fearless. Yeah, he said. But you won't. And you're not done yet. She wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. She turned and ran. Jace watched her disappear into the tunnel. He reloaded one last time, blood on his fingers, heart steady. As the Gravik burst through the entrance, he stood tall, weapon raised, defiant to the end, and smiled, because she was still alive, and that meant hope still burned. The tunnel shook behind Sorexa as the explosion tore through the outpost, sending a blast wave of fire and dust roaring up through the ground. The sound was deafening, and the shock nearly threw her off her feet. She didn't stop running. Her fingers tightened around the remote, the button now cracked and useless in her grip. Jace was gone. The thought stabbed her like a knife, but she couldn't let it break her, not now. She reached the hidden landing pad, a narrow stretch of cracked stone hidden under old cargo tarps and shield nets. The shuttle waited there, rough and patched up, clearly built from salvaged parts but still humming with power. The front panel bore Jace's mark, just a single, scratched-in star. She climbed in and threw herself into the pilot's seat, heart pounding, hands moving, with sharp precision. The engines coughed once, then caught, roaring to life with a sound like a wounded beast. The storm outside raged harder now, and Gravik patrols would be hunting her, furious and desperate after losing half a squad to one human and a detonated bunker. The shuttle lifted into the sky like a bullet, pushed up by thrusters that screamed, in protest. Sorexa fought the controls, rising through the thick clouds and dodging lightning bolts that cracked like whips around her. Once she broke through the storm layer, the stars opened above her like a breath of freedom. But she didn't have time to grieve, not yet. Gravik ships were already moving in orbit, 3 frigates circling the moon watching for signs of escape. They scanned everything, searching for her signal. Jace's shuttle didn't have stealth plating, and it didn't have weapons, but it did have a gravity inverter, a prototype barely working. Something he'd once mentioned was more art than science. Sorexa flipped it on. The ship stuttered, flickered, then vanished off the Gravik sensors for 2 seconds, long enough to coast between the scanning fields. It worked. She was clear, for now. Far behind her, the moon burned at the edge of vision. The crater, where Jace's outpost had stood, glowed like a star. She forced herself to look away and hit the jump drive. The ship rattled as it tore through folded space, slamming her back in the seat. Her mind reeled with grief, rage, and something deeper, respect. Jace had known who she was, even if she hadn't said it. He hadn't cared. He fought not for a crown, not for a title, but because it was right. Because someone needed help. That kind of loyalty couldn't be bought. And now she owed him everything. The jump ended in deep space, near the remains of a shattered Elandari cruiser. The beacon she remembered was still blinking. This was one of the last rally points, one of the old coded havens from the war. But it was quiet, too quiet. The wreck drifted in silence, hull broken, crew long gone. Sorexa floated above the wreckage, searching. Then a signal pinged her console, a hidden message embedded in the beacon's frequency. Coordinates. Not just a meeting place, a resistance base, survivors, fighters. She set course immediately. When she arrived hours later, hidden in the rings of a dead gas giant, she saw them. Ships, maybe 24, patched together, flying under no banner but alive, breathing, waiting. The base was built into the remains of a derelict mining station, forgotten by most of the galaxy. The moment Sorexa stepped onto the deck, weapons rose, but stopped when they saw her armor. And her eyes. A young Ilandari officer dropped his gun in shock. "Your Majesty," he whispered. She nodded once, not as a queen but as a soldier who had come back from death. "Get me your commander," she said. "We're done hiding." The resistance welcomed her not with parades or ceremony but with plans. Charts, intel. A dozen systems had fallen in the past 6 months to the Gravik horde. Refugees were vanishing. Colonies erased. The resistance was losing. But now, something changed. They had their queen back. More than that, they had her fire. A fire lit by a human engineer on a forgotten moon who gave his life to save hers. And Sorexa, standing at the heart of a growing storm, swore she would burn the Gravik horde down, star by star, until they remembered what it meant to fear the fire of free people. Jace hadn't died in vain. His story would fly with her into battle, and this time, she would not run. The resistance base had turned into a hive of purpose. Every corridor buzzed with urgency as engineers welded armor plates, pilots tuned engines, and tacticians mapped Gravik movements across star charts that blinked like burning coals. Sorexa moved through it all, not like a distant queen, but like a commander forged in fire. Her once polished armor bore the scorches of battle, still scratched from the moon where Jace had died. She carried no crown, only a memory. And that memory lit her steps with steady fury. She had seen what the Gravik were truly capable of, the things they had done on Elandari colonies and to the humans who had resisted. She'd heard the cries, seen the bodies left in cold orbit. There would be no peace, not with monsters who laughed as they conquered. The time for defense was over. Now it was time to strike. The target was not just any Gravik outpost, it was the supply gate at Kyrek Spire, a rotating command center that funneled fuel, weapons, and soldiers to 3 sectors. If they could destroy it, Gravik control would weaken across the region. The Resistance only had one real shot, and it would take everything they had. Sorexa didn't just approve the plan, she rewrote it. She knew the Gravik thought in domination and brute strength, never expecting someone to dare a frontal assault with such a small fleet. That would be their mistake. The Resistance ships were old and patched up, but they were fast, flexible, and flown by people who had nothing left to lose. Jace would have said, "That's the best kind of crew." She smiled faintly at the thought. As the fleet prepared, Sorexa stood before the crews. No speech, just a few quiet words. "We do this not to survive, but to live free. If we fall, let them remember the day we stood tall." That was all they needed. The engines fired minutes later, launching the fleet into the void like arrows. The stars blurred as the jump carried them across light years, directly toward Kyrek Spire. The Gravik station loomed ahead like a black claw wrapped in shields and rotating gun arrays. Behind it, 3 cruisers stood ready, each bristling with cannons. A death trap. And yet Sorexa did not flinch. Her ship, the Starbreaker, once an old transport, now led the charge, its hull rebuilt by Jace's designs and packed with the last of their explosives. The Gravik were slow to respond, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of enemy ships in the heart of their territory. That hesitation cost them. The Resistance fleet dove in hard, breaking formation into tight spirals that confused targeting systems. Explosions lit up the black, and fighters zipped between blasts like wasps. Sorexa's voice came steady over comms, guiding wings, calling shots, warning of incoming fire. She fought like she had trained her whole life for this moment, and maybe she had. On the deck of the Starbreaker, she saw the Gravik command ship locking onto them. Too big to dodge, too slow to turn. One shot would tear her apart. But then, she remembered what Jace had said the day they met. Everything breaks eventually. The trick is what you do before that happens. So she made her move. The Starbreaker dove directly at the command cruiser. Weapons were primed, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Not until the Gravik locked all their attention on her. That's when the second half of her plan hit. The gravity inverter, Jace's half-finished dream, flared alive. It wasn't supposed to work in combat, but Sorexa had retooled it with help from her engineers. The Gravik cruiser's targeting systems went blind as its local gravity warped, making everything inside tilt and spin. The Starbreaker slipped under the cruiser's belly, dropped its payload, and peeled away seconds before the bombs exploded. The Gravik command ship cracked in half, spilling fire and metal into space. The shockwave tore across the defense lines, breaking apart communications and collapsing energy shields. The Resistance followed through the breach like a storm. One by one, the enemy fell. When it was over, Kyrek Spire was gone. The entire Gravik supply line in the sector collapsed with it. Cheers roared across Resistance channels, but Sorexa didn't cheer. She sat in her seat, looking at the fading wreckage, and whispered, "You would have loved that, Jace." Then, she stood, adjusted her armor, and gave the order to jump. There were more battles ahead, and she would face them all. For Jace, for her people, for every star still burning with hope. Smoke curled gently from the vents of the Starbreaker as it limped back into Allied space, its hull cracked but not broken, its engines sputtering but still alive. The Resistance fleet had done the impossible. They hadn't just won. They'd shaken the Gravik war machine so hard that whole regions of their empire fell silent, uncertain. But the victory came with a cost. Half their fighters never returned, and among the missing was the human engineer who had once quietly repaired an alien woman's armor without knowing who she really was. Jace was gone. His loss hung over the fleet like a shadow. Every corridor Sorexa walked through held echoes of his voice, his laughter, the way he used to argue with machines as if they were stubborn friends. Yet even in that grief, something powerful stirred beneath her skin. Resolve. Jace had shown her more than clever fixes and silent strength. He had taught her what it meant to fight for something bigger than a throne, something worth bleeding, for freedom, dignity, hope. She had never expected to find that from a human hiding in the wreckage of a forgotten colony. Word of the Kyrex victory spread fast, faster than even Gravik commanders could suppress. Across the sector, suppressed species rose up, small bands like sparks in the dark. Some took up arms, some sabotaged Gravik tech, others simply refused to obey anymore. For the first time in years, the Gravik Empire looked vulnerable. In their desperation, they turned to cruelty, bombardments, executions. Entire moons burned to ash just to remind the galaxy of their power. But it was too late. The tide had turned. Resistance groups once divided now started working together, trading, plans, sharing intel, building something like an alliance. And at the center of that growing storm stood Sorexa, no longer just a warrior in exile, but a symbol. Rumors spread. The queen who fights. The one who dared. People whispered her name in shadows and shouted it in marches. Still, she didn't sit on a throne. She didn't claim a crown. She sat in hangars shoulder to shoulder with grease-stained pilots and bruised soldiers, rebuilding ships and planning missions. Jace's tools still hung from the pegboard in her quarters, untouched, like a shrine. She often stood there, looking at the soot-stained wrench he'd always carried, remembering how he'd shrugged off her title like it didn't mean a thing. "You're just another suit with busted tech," he'd once said, wiping grease across her armor. Fixable. He had made her laugh then, and now that memory hurt, but it also kept her going. When Gravik scouts discovered the location of the Resistance's temporary base on the edge of the Zareth belt, Sorexa didn't run. She set a trap. The Gravik sent 2 cruisers to crush what they believed was a dying ember. But instead of finding a desperate outpost, they flew into a field of cloaked mines, shield disruptors, and a dozen hidden ships, all rigged to strike fast and vanish. The battle lasted 6 minutes. The wreckage of Gravik cruisers drifted into the belt, and not a single Resistance ship was lost. It was Sorexa's message to the galaxy. We're still here, and we know how to win. More humans began joining the cause too. Colonists, salvagers, retired soldiers, even outlaws. They came with old gear, rusty ships, and broken pasts. But they came. Sorexa welcomed them all. She kept Jace's story alive, retelling it when new recruits asked why a queen lived in an old junker instead of a palace. "Because someone once fixed more than my armor," she'd say. "He reminded me who I was meant to be." One night after a long day of drills and repairs, she stepped outside the hangar and looked up at the stars. Quiet, cold, beautiful. A soft breeze stirred the dust. She held Jace's wrench in her hand, the metal warm from her grip. "You were right," she whispered. "Everything breaks eventually. But some things stay." The stars didn't answer, but they didn't need to. In that silence, she felt it, his presence, not in ghosts or dreams, but in the people now rising, in the ships flying higher than they ever dared. In every hand that reached for a better future, Jace had lit the fire. Sorexa would carry it forward. War still loomed. The Gravik would strike again. But the galaxy had changed. The queen who once wore armor to hide now wore it to lead, and behind her marched more than soldiers. They marched with belief, with purpose, with humanity. The Resistance wasn't just fighting back. They were becoming something unstoppable. The attack came just before dawn, when the Resistance base on the jungle moon of Kalari was at its quietest, with crews finishing night shifts and patrol ships cycling in. A faint hum in the outer atmosphere turned into a screech as Gravik drop pods broke through the clouds like burning meteors. Alarms roared, soldiers scrambled. The enemy had found them again. But this time it wasn't a scare tactic. It was a full-force invasion. Sorexa was already in motion before the first pod hit the ground. Her armor, now worn and scorched in places, clicked into place as she moved through the command center shouting orders. Fighters launched. Turrets spun to life. Explosions lit the sky as Gravik troops poured out, monstrous and silent as ever, their exosuits gleaming with crimson stripes of rank and death. The resistance held the first line for only minutes before being pushed back, forced into a bloody retreat deeper into the dense jungle. Trees exploded. Earth shook. The air smelled of burning leaves and plasma. Sorexa stayed in the thick of it, leading from the front. Her blade flashed, cutting through enemy ranks with the grace of a dancer and the fury of a storm. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and scattered. She fought toward the mobile command trailer where the comms array had been set up. If they couldn't send a call for help, the moon would fall by nightfall. She reached it just as a Gravik warrior crushed the front gate. She tackled him with all her strength, both of them crashing into a wall of supply crates. Her blade found a weak spot in his armor, and with a sharp twist, he dropped. She kicked open the comms door and slammed her palm onto the console. Sparks flew. Systems were down. Static. Dead signal. Something was jamming them. Not outside, but inside. That's when she saw it. A jamming spike dug into the nearby ridge. A sabotage unit had snuck in before the main force. She cursed under her breath and sprinted out, pushing past fallen comrades and ducking fire. A human pilot, Enzo, spotted her and shouted, "We're being overrun!" She didn't stop running. "Hold them," she shouted back. "Buy me 10 minutes." Enzo didn't argue. He just grabbed his rifle and turned to fight. Reaching the ridge felt like scaling a mountain while the world fell apart behind her. Enemy drones spotted her halfway up, sending streams of red-hot fire down toward her. She rolled under fallen logs and jumped across sharp rocks, heart pounding. Her armor hissed with every impact, energy shields dropping fast. She took a hit to the shoulder that spun her sideways, but she climbed, teeth clenched, blood dripping from her gauntlet. When she finally reached the top, the jamming spike stood like a spear driven into the moon itself, surrounded by 3 Gravik guards. She didn't pause. She charged. The first fell in a blink, her blade through his core. The second blocked her strike and knocked her backward, but she used the momentum to grab a loose boulder and crush his helmet. The third tried to fire, but his weapon jammed just as she closed in. Her knife buried in his throat, she yanked it free and turned to the spike. She ripped off a panel, sparks flying into her face. Her fingers moved fast, remembering Jace's teachings. Cut power at the base, don't fight the surge, reroute it. Her lips moved silently with the memory. Wires snapped, circuits hissed. Then, the spike shut down, and the skies opened. Reinforcements arrived seconds later. Ships from the scattered fleet, led by Sorexa's new command wing, dropped in through the clouds with roaring engines and blazing weapons. Fighters screamed across the sky, strafing enemy lines. Dropships unloaded fresh troops who pushed forward like a crashing tide. The tide had turned. Gravik lines broke under the sudden force. Some tried to retreat, but the jungle had closed in behind them, trapping them in a maze of fire and fury. The resistance reclaimed the base by noon. Bodies littered the ground. Wounded soldiers cried for medics, but they had held. Sorexa stood at the ridge as the last Gravik vessel exploded mid-air. Her shoulder throbbed. Her face was streaked with ash and blood, but her eyes were sharp. Beside her, Enzo limped up and handed her a ration bar. "Told you I'd buy you 10 minutes. He grinned. She took it with a small nod. "You bought us a future." And for the first time in days, she allowed herself a breath of relief. The resistance had survived another storm. The Gravik would return, stronger and angrier. But now they knew, the humans were not broken. The Queen still stood and the fire had spread. ChatGPT said, "The jungle moon was quiet again, its skies clear for the first time in weeks. Smoke still hung low over the burned trees, and the scent of war clung to everything. But for the survivors of the resistance, there was peace, if only for a while." As repairs began across the shattered base, Sorexa stood in the courtyard, her armor scratched and scorched, helmet tucked under her arm. Around her, soldiers and engineers moved with new purpose. The tide had turned. Ships came, and went carrying the wounded, bringing supplies and delivering messages of hope from other hidden cells across the system. The resistance was no longer a flicker in the dark. It was a flame spreading through the stars. And at the center of it stood a queen no longer hidden. Her identity was out. The wounded Gravik commander, captured during the retreat, had shouted it aloud during interrogation. "You're the bloodline of fire, you're the Storm Crown." News traveled fast. Whispers spread like wind. Serexa of Kailari, the unknown warrior, was the last true heir of the Zarethri throne, the royal bloodline that once ruled half the galaxy before the Gravik conquest wiped them out. But that changed nothing for Jace. He stood at the edge of the hangar, arms crossed, grease still on his sleeves. He watched her with quiet eyes, just as he always had, even before the battles and the explosions and the truths. To him, she wasn't a queen. She was the stubborn woman who'd dragged a broken warsuit into his shop and demanded repairs without so much as a greeting. She was the one who had scolded him for overcharging and then brought him coffee the next day. She was the one who had fought beside him when the Gravik first landed, bleeding and roaring like she had something left to lose. And now, she stood taller, but not distant, not untouchable. When she finally turned and walked toward him, Jace felt the weight of all that had passed settle on his shoulders. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a prince or a hero, but he had helped hold the line. He had patched armor and rewired fighters. He had stood when others fell. And somehow, that had been enough. Serexa stopped in front of him, her gaze soft. "You still owe me a new flight stabilizer," he said with a smirk, trying to keep things light. She smiled. Just a small one, but it lit her face. "And you still owe me a nameplate for that suit," she answered. Jace's special fixes wasn't going to last on royal armor. He chuckled, then her voice dropped low. "You saved me. More than once." He shrugged. "You saved us all." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hangar buzzed behind them, ships rising and falling. Somewhere, a child, one of the evacuees, laughed. It was the first real sound of joy in weeks. And then Serexa said something he hadn't expected. "I want you to come with me." His brow furrowed. "Where?" "To Zareth," she said. "We're taking it back." The word hit hard. Zareth, the ruined capital of the Lost Empire, still held by Gravik forces, still burning, still dangerous. He looked at her and saw not just a fighter, but a leader, a queen. And still, underneath it all, the woman who trusted him with her life. "You need warriors, not engineers," he said quietly. "I need both," she replied. "And I need someone who sees the parts no one else does, not just metal and wires, people." He hesitated. He'd built his life in the shadows of war, never the center. But now the center was calling. And maybe, just maybe, it was time. He gave a slow nod. "All right, let's take back your home." Her smile widened, this time with pride and something deeper, hope. As they walked together toward the launch platform, the soldiers straightened. Pilots saluted. The Resistance had a queen, but more than that, it had something the Gravik could never crush. Unity, heart, humanity. Across the stars, worlds stirred. Old enemies took notice. The Gravik High Command sent a transmission. "The Queen has returned, prepare for war." But humanity didn't flinch. Jace looked out across the stars and said quietly, "Let them come." Because now, the galaxy knew. Humans didn't kneel easily. And when they rose as one.